about the POPI Act and what the importance of that is on your business. Our guest speaker this morning is Daniel Richards from Kok and van Staden. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you, Ettienne.
Daniel is an attorney in town and he specializes in commercial law. So Dani, what is the importance of the POPI Act and how does it influence our business?
Yeah, Ettienne, firstly, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on the POPI Act. And the POPI Act is very important. The Act will come into force the 1st of July this year. Now, POPI is short for Protection of Personal Information Act 4 of 2013. So it's a very, very important act, and all business people in South Africa will need to comply to this act. And maybe just a little bit of background. We all know that we live in an electronic era. We use the internet all the time. We visit websites. We use forums like Facebook and WhatsApp and all these internet forums. And our personal information are flying all over the place. It's being shared and it's being used. And the reality is that you'll be frightened if you see what people can do with your personal information. If people have access to your personal information in an unauthorized way, they can harm you in many, many ways. There are fraud schemes where people use your personal information. And the reality is that our legislator had to take a grip on this situation, and they had to regulate this whole issue of personal information, how to go about with it. So the importance of this POPI Act is to regulate the use of personal information, the gathering of personal information, the sharing of personal information. So maybe I should just give a little definition of what the POPI Act is about, and then we can get going. Now, in simple terms, this POPI Act is to ensure that all South Africans conduct themselves in a responsible manner when they deal with other people's personal information. And it is about the processing of personal information, storing of personal information, sharing of personal information, and the Act holds people accountable when they deal with other people's personal information. So the Act describes how you should go about, how you need to comply, what you need to do, what you can do, what you can't do. So it's a very important Act, and it just deals with the situation of personal information. The Act actually has a definition of this personal information. The Act calls it precious goods. Now, so what the Act says is that your personal information, my personal information, is precious. And this precious goods needs to be protected. And that's what the POPI Act is about, is regulating this whole situation of protecting your precious goods.
Okay, so Daniel, what is precious goods, and can you give us a few examples of the personal information that you're speaking about?
Yes, precious goods in terms of the Act is obvious things and also things that you wouldn't have imagined as being precious. But the Act describes precious goods as identity number, your passport number. That's very important. We had a case where a lady wanted to get married, and when she wanted to register her marriage, she found out she was already married to a Nigerian because someone got hold of her ID book, and so that's precious goods, and that harmed her in many ways. So your identity number, copies of your identity book, your passport, that is precious. Also, date of birth and age. The Act says that is precious goods that needs to be protected. Your phone numbers, your contact details, that's very important to just secure that and protect that. Your email address, stuff like that. And that's the obvious things. But the Act also protects issues like your gender and your race. If I have a client, I cannot communicate my client's race or gender or ethnic origin, those are protected. It is precious goods that needs to be protected. The Act goes on to say even photos and voice recordings and video footage, even this CCTV footage that often we share this on forums like YouTube or so, that is protected. That's precious goods. So we need to look at what this Act says. Stuff like your criminal record. That's also something that if you know the status of someone's criminal record, you cannot share that. You need to protect that. Private correspondence, religious beliefs, religious views, your employment history, your salary information, financial information, educational information. The list goes on and on. Issues like mental health and medical history, even your membership to organizations like a golf club or whatever. So everything that is connected to me as a person, that identifies me as a person, those is seen by the Act as precious goods and it needs to be protected.
Wow.
It's quite a mouthful, but
yeah,
it's something that we need to take note of.
Wow. So Daniel, as you mentioned, it's a long list of stuff, but what happens if our business or businesses in general do not comply to the Act?
That's a very important question. If we don't comply to this Act, we may face a lot of problems. If we are prosecuted, the Act says that sentences of up to 10 years is appropriate. You can go to jail for 10 years if you don't comply, and also you may be fined with fines up to 10 million rand. So this is very important, especially I think directors of companies needs to take note of what's happening in the situation, because you run a company and your company deals with people's personal information, and if you don't comply to this Act, they will go to the director and you can be fined, you can go to jail for 10 years. So I think there's an Afrikaans saying that say that the POPI gaan dans. If you don't comply to this Act, there's going to be problems. Yes. You need to comply.
And how do we comply? What do we need to put in place to make sure that we as a business do comply to the POPI Act?
Yes, compliance with the POPI Act is a serious issue, and it's also a time-consuming issue. It's actually difficult to comply because of the complexity of this Act. If you read the Act, it's quite frustrating to try and find out what you need to do and how to do it. So in the end of the day, the Act tried to boil it down to 8 areas of compliance, and I can quickly maybe just read it, and then we can see what you need to do as a business person to comply to this Act. Now, the first thing the Act specifies is the issue of accountability. You need to realize that you as a business person you are accountable. They say ignorancy of the law is no excuse. So when you deal with people's personal information, you will be held accountable. So the accountability issue is highlighted by this Act. And in a practical way, I think you as a director of a company, you need to go and sit down and just contemplate this issue. And you need to decide what type of information do I need? Because people collect information from their clients, but sometimes they don't need all that information. So, and the more information you gather, the more you will be held accountable. Yes. So your accountability goes up the more you gather. So as a director of a company, you can maybe decide, I need this and I need that and I don't need this. So I think you should realize you're accountable. And then the next issue that the Act amplifies is the issue of processing limitations. So when you gather personal information, the way you process that information is regulated by law. So you need to focus on that as well. And then there's an issue of purpose specification. When you gather someone's personal information, ID numbers, contact details, etc., then you have to have a purpose with that. And I think the key word is consent. If you gather someone's personal information, you have to have consent from that person as to what you're going to do with that information. So there are limitations, and you have to gather information for a specific purpose. If you gather information for a specific purpose and you use it for another purpose, you'll get into trouble. So that's one issue. The fourth point is further processing limitations. It's amazing. They tell you you have a limitation on purpose, limitation on processing, and then they have further processing limitations. And it just depends on what type of information you gather. And then there's this issue of information quality. The Act describes that issue. I'm not going into details now. I'm just telling you what the Act says, and then maybe we can get to a few practical issues later. Then the whole issue of openness. You have to have an open policy. Anyone can come to you as a director and ask you, how are you dealing with personal information? What are you doing with my personal information? So you have to be open and transparent. That's the issue. Transparency is the issue. And then the Act specifies many security safeguards. The moment you gather someone's personal information and you have it on your databases as a company, then you have to have certain safeguards in place to ensure that someone can't steal it, or it can get lost or damaged or corrupted. So the safeguarding of people's personal information, very, very important. And then there's this issue of data subject participation. It's all words that this Act comes up with. Now, it's amazing that you as an individual or as a company are called data subjects by this Act. So I'm a data subject, and as a data subject, I have rights. I have rights that when you take my personal information, what are you going to do with it? So the Act also specifies that. Now, this is difficult to work through and to decide how are you going to comply. So to make it easy, you asked, how can I comply with this Act? What is the practical issues? Now, the first thing that you as a business person needs to do is to appoint a specific person in your organization that takes responsibility for this compliance, a compliance officer. You need to appoint one of those. It will typically be a manager. Someone is appointed. So that's the first thing. And the next thing you need to do is to develop a policy, a compliance policy regarding the POPI Act. So when a regulator knocks at your door and asks you, okay, are you compliant? So the first thing you need to do is to say, I've got a compliance officer. And then you call the poor guy and he needs to explain now. And he has to take out some paperwork and show this regulator that you have a policy in place. And it's not one of these acts where you do the paperwork and you put it in a drawer somewhere and you forget about it. This is very serious. The compliance officer needs to ensure that this policy that you develop is actually implemented in your business in a practical day-to-day work. All the employees need to know exactly how the policy works, and you need to conduct your business. So appoint an officer and develop a plan, a policy.
Wow. Daniel, is this the same as the GDPR, the POPI Act?
Yes, the GDPR is regulations that was formulated internationally. So a long time ago, the international community realized that they need to develop rules and regulations regarding the way people go about with other people's personal information. And it is applicable to most European countries, and I know also the South African continent. So those rules apply. So if your business is involved in business overseas or in other African companies or so, then you need to comply to that. And it's not the same as the POPI Act. I think the POPI Act is much more controlling and much more intense than those. But in a certain way, in a certain extent, it is the same thing. But I think you need to distinguish. When you do business in South Africa, the POPI Act applies. When you do business abroad, both the POPI Act and the GDPR applies. So you need to take note of that. That's a very good question.
Okay. So Daniel, you spoke about the gathering of information, and I know there's a lot of companies that already has a lot of data or a database of their clients. How does this POPI Act influence that database?
Yeah, that's a very important question. All your questions are important. That's true. We, as business people, we have databases of personal information of our clients, and the Act is very strict on the way you go about with that. So you need, as I said just now, you need to have certain safeguards in place, and you need to get in your IT guys. And the Act says that when a compliance officer or a regulator knocks at your door, there are a few things that you need to be able to provide. Firstly, you need to be able to show when the information was gathered, date and time, when you gathered certain information. You need to show the purpose why this information was gathered. You need to show the safeguards and security issues that you have in place to protect the data. That's just a few of the things the Act says. So with concerning your data, very important that you get in a specialist to help you to put a manual in place of how you're going to go about, and also your IT people to get your programs to also comply to the Act. There are certain issues like, for instance, you need to gather information for a certain purpose. But when that purpose expires, then you need to destroy the information, and your programs need to adapt to that. So you need to be able to show, okay, we've been using this information, we finalized the work or whatever we did, and then we destroy the information. And another burden the Act places on business people is that once you have a database, you need to communicate with your data subjects, your people, your clients all the time, and you need to update their information from time to time. So it's important. And another issue, the issue of transparency. When a client calls in, you need to be able, with a press of a button, be in a position to provide him with all the information that you have regarding that situation. So you have to look at your systems, you have to have that in place.
Wow. There's so many stuff that you need to get in place just to be compliant to this Act, and it seems that it's also an ongoing thing that as new rules and regulations comes in, it will have an influence. So I'm guessing all of you are watching us on Facebook Live, and we want to take a few questions. So before I ask you the next question, you guys can go on and please just post a few questions on Facebook. We'll go through a few of them and ask Daniel what's his opinion on that. So Daniel, my next question is, how does the POPI Act influence online marketing?
Yes, I think online marketing is severely influenced by this Act. The regulator, the legislator recognized the issue of harassment. People obtain your personal information in an unlawful way, and then they harass you with marketing calls at any time of the day. And the Act specifically, I think it's Section 69, and further sections addresses this issue. So marketing companies need to comply with this Act. If someone calls you, and you can ask them, where did you get my information? What information do you have? And what are you going to do with it? And yes, marketing, telemarketing is in trouble. And I don't know, we're still busy working out schemes and to help them to still be able to operate. But I think the main purpose of the Act is to say that you have to have permission, you have to have consent of a data subject to use his data. So practically, if you have a business and someone, one of the data subjects is one of your clients, then obviously you will be allowed to make marketing calls to that data subject because they are already doing business with you, they consented with you, they gave their consent, and you're able to market. But a random telemarketing calling you, I hope that's something of the past.
So you mentioned that you are able to market to your clients because they gave consent. But does that mean that you need to have a form that they need to complete or sign off before you are able to market to them?
Yes, that comes to the practicalities. Let's make it practical. As a business, when I do business with a certain person, the Act calls him a data subject, then I need to gather his personal information. So you need to devise, I call it a client information and agreement form. You need to develop that. And in that documentation, your client will give his consent that you can do certain things with information. It's important to have a person's consent. And I don't know whether you've noticed, but when you visit certain websites of businesses, then this pop-up comes up with this cookie,
Yes.
cookies, and they ask you, are you accepting the cookies or not? Now that's people that are busy complying with the POPI Act,
Okay.
because they need to get permission.
Okay.
So POPI and cookie goes together. You know.
Okay, awesome. So Daniel, we have a few questions here. The first one that came through is, how does the POPI Act influence my company's vacancy and recruitment process?
Obviously, it's once again comes back to consent. So the moment you recruit people, you gather their personal information, you have to have their consent to use that information. And while we're on that consent issue, just a practical issue, say for instance, you do business with a certain client and he doesn't pay you and you want to hand him over to his lawyers. The lawyer should issue summons now. So now you're giving the lawyer his ID number, full names, addresses. And if you don't have consent to do that, it's one of the defenses that person may come up with. Now, this needs to be tested in court still. And we don't know whether someone will get away with it as a perfect defense. But you see, the mere issue is that you're giving a person that owes your client money a stick in his hand to hit you if you don't have his consent. So I would think that you should redo all your paperwork. So when someone comes to you and he does business with you, then you need to get his consent that if something happens, I give consent that you may give my personal information to the lawyer. It's practical issues like that.
Okay, so do you need to stipulate that you will be using it for that purpose, or can you set it up in a general way that you may share it with third parties?
Yes, you can have general consent paragraphs, but I would think that you should, when I visit a business as a lawyer and I need to get their compliance, to help them to comply, then I consult with the directors and I find out exactly what are they doing. And then in their paperwork, I will accommodate for any issue that may arise. Okay. I think there's no specific recipe that anyone can follow. You need to decide, what is this company doing? Okay, then now you can make his paperwork fit the whole situation. So that's the issue.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Next question. By what date should everyone be compliant with the POPI Act? Is there a date that government set that we should all be compliant with?
Yes, Cyril Ramaphosa signed the paperwork and this act will come into force on the 1st of July this year. So I think it's important that all businesses should have their paperwork in place before the 1st of July.
Okay.
And the whole issue is not just the POPI Act. Compliance in South Africa these days is a very important issue. There are so many acts that businesses need to comply with. So it's very important to get specialized help, someone that understands this, to help you to get the compliance as a whole in place. For instance, the PIA situation, we also have this Promotion of Access to Information Act. And we actually need to have a PIA policy in place as well. And this is like directly in line with the POPI compliance. So once you get a practitioner that can help you to get your business compliance in place, you need to address the PIA Act and the POPI Act. Any given business will have to comply to many regulations, many laws. So some businesses will have to comply to 30 different laws just to be compliant. Yeah. And you can't just give it to the company secretary. They don't know what laws are applicable. So it's a holistic approach that you have to have.
That's an awesome answer, and I see it goes with the next question that we have, is what practical advice do you have for business owners? Where should I start? Is there any resources I can use? Maybe you can just elaborate on that.
Well, my short answer is come and see me, I will help you. The main issue is, as I said just now, you need to appoint a person that will take responsibility, an officer, compliance officer, and then you need to devise and invent a policy regarding PIA and POPI and various other acts. Yes. So I think it's a good policy to speak to a practitioner that understands these issues and that can help you get your stuff in place. And it's an ongoing process. It's not always possible to sit down with a business owner for 2 hours and then bam, he's got his document. Yes. You really need to consult and see what are these people actually doing and what will work in their situation.
Wow. Daniel, the next question. This is from Yolandi Moorman. If you have been communicating with your database regularly over years, plus they have had the option to unsubscribe from communication, are you compliant or not? And then what else do you need to practically implement on the above database in order to be compliant?
Yes, that is also a very relevant question. You would have noticed that when you get communication from companies these days, they always have this little sentence at the end to say opt out, press this to opt out. Yes. So it's very important to have that. So once you send marketing material to one of your data subjects, one of your clients, you need to give that client the opportunity to opt out. And once he does, once he decides not to take any part in any further material, then your databases should be designed in such a way that it removes that person. That's very important. Okay. But that's only a certain sphere of this act. When you are compliant in that area, it doesn't say you're compliant on all the other areas. So it's important so it's good if you have that in place. It's a good start. Okay. But that won't sort out your whole issue and your whole problem.
Okay. On to the next question. What are the implications of your business not being compliant with the POPI Act? Something I would like to be able to communicate to my clients. I think this question you addressed in the beginning as well, with you can be fined.
Yes.
And also you can you can go to jail. But is there anything else?
I understand that question. You know, big businesses like the Potch University, I'm involved with the Potch University as well. They've been dealing with this act since 2013, when this act first became an issue. And they are compliant. But it irritated their data subjects, because it's a lot of communication. And when someone wants to do business with me, I first have to take him through a whole lot of questions and get consent, and he has to fill out forms, and that irritates people. And as a business person, I don't want to irritate my clients. I want to make them feel happy and comfortable, and I must create an environment where they can do business with me in an easy way, not a cumbersome way. So in the beginning, it's going to be difficult because, as that person said, you will have to communicate with your clients, you have to get their consent, and it's an ongoing process. And it's good if she can communicate to her clients, you know what, if I don't comply to this, I can go to jail for 10 years.
Yes.
And I can be fined 10 million, then I'm out of business.
Yes.
So, sorry, I have to comply. And it's maybe good that they can just tell the data subjects what's going to happen if they don't comply.
And I guess if all businesses do make it this a priority, then soon everyone will be used to that form of communication.
I agree with you. All businesses will have to comply now. So it's going to be in an order of that. It's like wearing face masks. If you told me more than a year ago I would be wearing a face mask all the time, I would have thought you mad. But now it's just part of everyday living, and I think it's exactly the same with this act. All businesses will have to do it, and everyone will get used to it.
Okay. On to the next question. Has government made an estimate cost what it would cost small and medium enterprises to be compliant?
I don't know, and even if they did, I think they would be wrong. It's impossible to estimate the costs. Practitioners out there have different ways of handling this issue. Sometimes when a business person comes to me and he wants a once-off situation, there I go through all his documentation and then I will give a quote. It depends on how many hours I'm going to spend in that specific business, so it's impossible to say beforehand. Other businesses come to me and they say, listen, we want to be compliant to all the regulations and laws in the country. So on a monthly basis, they pay a certain fee every month, and then we have to ensure the compliance all over. So there are different ways and different avenues.
Okay. Next question, Daniel. Does the POPI Act have an implication on schools, churches, or religious centers? Or is it only for companies that conduct business?
Is this act affects everyone? And traditionally, we feel schools would maybe feel, oh no, we've been doing this for hundreds of years, and religious organizations will feel, but we're not a business. So, but the issue is, when the moment you gather personal information of a person, you need to comply. So it's impossible for a school or a religious organization to operate without having a databases of the data subjects. Yeah. So obviously they need to comply.
They do need to comply, yeah. Next question is, from an IT perspective, what is the importance of management involvement in your IT planning and security in relation to POPI?
Is the IT side of this may be a nightmare at first, because you need to accommodate many issues, and so it would be a good plan to set up a meeting with a practitioner, a lawyer that understands this, and your IT guys. Sit around a table, have a meeting, and they will take notes, and the lawyer will tell them you need to do this and that and this. And the IT guys will, his eyes will, I've seen that. Yeah. And then they just have to adapt your software to accommodate these issues. But once you are through this and you've done this and you're compliant, it's a day-to-day thing. Then it just comes naturally.
Okay. Daniel, I see we can go on forever with the questions, but this is going to be the last question. If a business collects cell phone numbers as part of competition entries via point of sale software, via cashier, asking verbally for a phone number, would one need consent before using the number to phone a winner?
I'm going to be like a politician and say, you know, that's a very good question. What's your next question? No, obviously, if you want to use someone's personal information, you will have to have that person's consent. It's all about consent.
All about consent.
I gather your information. I cannot do anything with it without your specific consent. And I think if a business person out there can just get that in his mind, just in the back of the mind, always know, I'm gathering info, but I need to have consent to use it in the way I'm going to use it in my specific organization. So if you have some kind of an agreement where your data subject, your clients tells you, you're allowed to do this and this and that with my info, I think you're fine.
Okay. Okay, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today and for answering a lot of questions. There's still a few questions that needs answers, but we're going to post your contact details on our Facebook page, and then people can come and see with all the questions and how to be compliant to the POPI Act. And then we want to thank PictureCafé, who hosted this webinar for us. They are our media partners, and the video will be on their YouTube channel. I think it will be in the next half an hour or an hour. It will be available to view again. So thank you for joining us, and yeah, all the best.
No, thank you. From my side, it's a privilege to speak to you regarding this act, and I'll ask my grandchildren to help me to go onto Facebook to answer the questions.
Awesome.
Thank you so
Donnie.
much.
We appreciate it.